You were born into a lie so ancient, it became your reality. Every thought you've had, every truth you've been told, shaped by an age that is now collapsing. But before you can understand what's rising, you have to see the spell that's breaking. Why did they teach you to worship suffering? Why was your power hidden behind symbols, saviors, and sacrifice? And why, in your lifetime, is everything unraveling? Because by the end of this video, you won't just know the difference between the ages, you'll remember why your soul chose to live through both. There was a time when time didn't rule us. It moved in circles, not numbers. It was felt, not measured. The rising of the moon, the breath of the equinox, the slow turning of the constellations, all of it told a story far more ancient than the ticking of any clock. The ancients didn't believe in time the way we do. They listened to it. The Mayans, the Egyptians, the Vedic seers, they didn't see the future as something separate from the divine. They saw time as a living force, a sacred rhythm woven into the soul of the cosmos. To them, time was not linear. It spiraled like galaxies. It breathed like spirit. But that rhythm was broken, and we forgot. Somewhere between empires and empires collapsing, a new story of time was written. One that did not serve the soul, but the system. The Julian calendar, the Gregorian reform, the carving of days into boxes, the slicing of life into deadlines, debt cycles, 9-to-5 slavery, a mechanical illusion that replaced cosmic memory with control. What once aligned us with the stars now traps us in schedules. What once helped us plant with the moon and heal with the solstice now has us worshipping time as currency. This illusion of progress, that we are always moving forward, is the greatest lie time ever told. Because forward toward what? Toward machines, toward forgetting the earth beneath our feet, toward a version of the future that sells you more but awakens you less. This spell of time is not just about clocks, it's about forgetting the sacred. And here's the thing no one told you. The ages aren't just metaphors, they're epochs of consciousness. The Age of Pisces, the Age of Aquarius. These aren't poetic labels, they are real astronomical ages marked by the Earth's 26,000-year precessional cycle. The slow wobble of the planet that causes the spring equinox to rise through the zodiac like a cosmic hand moving across an ancient dial. And we've been moving from one age to another, from Pisces to Aquarius, from the dream to the awakening. But most people don't know what that means because we've been taught to see time as a straight line, not a cycle. We've been trained to forget that the stars are speaking, that your soul chose to incarnate not at random, but in a precise moment within this great celestial breath. And now, that breath is changing, the spell is weakening, and those who feel the rhythm returning are starting to wake up, not because of a calendar date, but because something ancient inside you remembers, a time before time was a prison, and it's calling you back to the rhythm, back to the spiral, back to the story behind the illusion. Do you feel it? The ticking is fading, and something older is beginning to rise. The Age of Pisces began like a soft fog rolling over the collective mind, not with violence, but with forgetting. Roughly 2,000 years ago, the equinox sun began rising in the constellation of Pisces, marking the start of a new astrological age, a shift that would shape everything, from our myths and symbols to our religions, governments, and inner lives. And like all ages, it had a lesson and a cost. Pisces is the sign of belief, of mysticism, of surrender, but also of illusion, of martyrdom, of escapism. It swims in two directions, towards spirit and away from it. And for nearly 2 millennia, humanity was caught between those currents. We were taught that salvation comes from outside, that divinity lives in heaven, not within. That questioning was rebellion, and obedience was virtue. The mystic was silenced. The prophet was burned. The priest became the gatekeeper of God. The Age of Pisces gave us beautiful symbols, the fish, the ocean, the dream. But it also buried the truth beneath dogma. It replaced direct experience with doctrine. It turned soul truths into scriptures, then twisted them into rules. And slowly, over centuries, we forgot. We forgot the temples inside our breath. We forgot the stars etched in our bones. We forgot that the sacred could be felt, not just believed. And the forgetting didn't happen overnight. It was subtle, layered. It came through empire, through conquest, through Rome's adoption of a rising spiritual movement and its rebranding into a system of control, through the Council of Nicaea, where sacred texts were edited or erased, through the rise of centralized religion, not as a guide to the divine, but as a replacement for it. And what was installed was dependence. Dependence on authority, dependence on saviors, dependence on a version of God that lived far away, too high to reach, too holy to embody. This was the great inversion, where once the divine was known as immanent, now it became distant. Where once enlightenment was a path walked in silence, now it became a reward for obedience. The Age of Pisces made faith a currency and fear its enforcement. But here's the paradox. The age was not a mistake. It was a mirror. It showed us what happens when the sacred is externalized, when belief replaces knowing, when the light is turned outward and the inner flame is ignored. And yet, the soul remembers. Even in the darkest parts of Pisces, the witch trials, the holy wars, the silencing of the feminine, there were whispers, monks in caves, Sufis dancing under stars, mystics who knew the map was not the territory. They kept the thread alive. So now, as the fog begins to lift, you're not just waking up, you're returning to what they tried to make you forget. You are not here to reject the Age of Pisces, but to transmute it. Because forgetting was part of the plan. But now, it's time to remember. The fish has always swum between worlds. Long before the Christian cross, before the icons and cathedrals, there was a quiet symbol. Two intersecting arcs forming a shape known as the Vesica Piscis, a sacred geometry, a portal between dimensions, and later simplified into the sign of the fish. It became the mark of the early Christians, a secret signal carved into stone, etched in sand, drawn by hand when words would have meant death. It wasn't just a symbol of belief. It was a map, because Pisces, the 12th sign of the zodiac, is ruled by Neptune, god of the seas, of dreams, of mysticism and illusion. It speaks in visions, not facts, in feelings, not logic. And so, as the sun moved into Pisces around the time of Christ's appearance, that fish was more than metaphor. It was an initiation into a new spiritual era and a new kind of faith. But what began as a flame quickly became a leash. Faith, in its truest form, is a sacred trust in what cannot yet be seen, but must still be honored. It's the soul's recognition of mystery, a quiet knowing that doesn't need proof, because it's already rooted in the heart. But when fear enters faith, faith becomes weaponized. And so, Belief without knowing became the new law, not inner knowing, not direct communion, but blind belief in stories passed down from pulpits, doctrines that demanded obedience, rituals that replaced experience. You were told to believe in someone else's salvation, to worship someone else's journey, to trust that heaven was a place above, and only the worthy would be allowed in. And the symbol of the fish, once sacred, became a brand, a logo for institutions, a badge of division. Faith was no longer about going inward. It was about agreeing outwardly. And the price of disagreement was exile, or worse. This is how fear was woven into the soul, not as chaos, but as control, not as panic, but as subtle, sacred-seeming pressure. If you doubted, you were wrong. If you questioned, you were lost. If you saw the divine in yourself, you were heretical. And so the Age of Pisces taught the world to look up for answers, but never inward, to wait for someone to save you, but never remember that you are the one you've been waiting for. And yet, even in the shadow of this age, the fish still swam, through symbols, through stories, through the deep emotional pull many felt towards something greater, something ineffable, something that couldn't be named, only felt. That was the echo, the call back home. The fish was never about belief. It was always about depth. And now, as the tide of ages turns, the illusion begins to dissolve, and beneath it, the original meaning returns. Not fear, not blind faith, but presence and the sacred knowing that what you seek was never outside of you. It was never just about belief. It was architecture, a spiritual scaffolding built to shape minds, emotions, entire civilizations, and at the heart of it all, hierarchy. The Age of Pisces introduced a blueprint, not drawn in stone, but etched in the invisible structures of religion, a system so vast, so interwoven, that it became nearly impossible to see, unless you stepped outside of it. The priests stood closest to God. The masses stood below, and between them, rules, rituals, confessions, obedience. This wasn't the path of mystical experience. This was the path of delegation, the divine outsourced to an institution. It began subtly, with symbols, with scriptures, with stories, but soon salvation became a product, gate-kept, sold, and guarded fiercely. You were told that God lived in a temple, but only certain men could enter. You were told that truth lived in a book, but only the ordained could interpret it. You were told you were born flawed and must earn your way back to grace. This is the hidden blueprint behind religions, the sacred inverted into systems of control. And it wasn't limited to one tradition. Whether in cathedrals or mosques, temples or tabernacles, the pattern repeated: hierarchy, authority, separation. From Brahmin priests in Vedic society, to the papal throne of Rome, to imams and intermediaries, the Piscean model fed on distance. Distance between the seeker and the divine. Distance between earth and heaven. Distance between spirit and self. This was not the original message. This was the infrastructure laid over it, because Pisces governs belief. And when belief becomes institutionalized, it becomes power. And power always protects itself. Religions became empires. Faith became territory. And those who challenged the system, mystics, healers, visionaries, were silenced or sanctified, depending on how useful they were to the order. But hidden in plain sight were the clues. The teachings of Yeshua weren't about hierarchy. They were about inner kingdoms. the words of Buddha weren't about worship, they were about awakening. Even the Sufi poets, spinning beneath the stars, sang not of doctrine, but of union. And yet, time and time again, the message was stripped of its power and replaced with permission. You needed permission to be divine, permission to be forgiven, permission to remember. This is how the blueprint worked, not through chains, but through conditioning. The most effective prisons are the ones you cannot see, the ones you're taught to love. And yet, the soul never fully forgets. Even within the systems built to suppress, light leaked through the cracks, in moments of stillness, in personal prayer, in the quiet rebellion of those who dared to listen inwardly. Now, the structure is trembling. The blueprint is visible, and what once disguised itself as salvation is beginning to collapse under its own weight, not because truth is lost, but because truth is rising. At first, it felt like love, devotion, the surrender of the self to something greater, a yearning to dissolve into the mystery, to belong to the divine. This was the promise. To lose yourself in faith was seen as noble. To give your will to God was holiness. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The water became mist, and what once connected us to the source began to obscure it. Devotion became disconnection, not because it was impure, but because it was redirected. You were told that the highest virtue was self-denial, that your thoughts, your desires, your questions were sinful. You were taught to kneel before a distant authority, not just physically, but spiritually. And slowly, you stopped listening to the voice within. That voice, the one that once whispered in your quiet moments, the one that nudged you gently toward your own knowing, was drowned beneath scripture, sermons, and shame. And what replaced it? Noise. The noise of rules, of right and wrong, of rituals with no meaning, of prayers spoken not from the heart, but from habit. You didn't stop seeking the divine. You were just trained to stop seeking it inside yourself. And so the mist grew thicker. Pisces is the sign of dissolution, of merging. But when the self merges with illusion, it forgets its shape, and this forgetting became normal. You were praised for it. To be humble was to disappear. To be holy was to erase your boundaries. To be devoted was to be silent. Silent when the doctrine didn't make sense. Silent when the pain didn't align with the promise. Silent when your soul screamed for something real. This was not surrender. This was suppression. And yet, we called it faith. But deep in the waters of Pisces, a different current always moved. The mystic current. The current that remembered devotion not as disappearance, but as communion. Mystics never lost their shape. They just expanded it. They didn't silence the inner voice. They followed it. But they were the exception, because the age taught the masses to vanish, to forget that they were fragments of the divine, not servants of it, to forget that the self is not the enemy of the soul, but its vessel. And so, over centuries, the mist became culture. The disconnection became identity. You stopped asking, stopped trusting your own resonance, and started echoing the voices of others. Not because you were blind, but because you were taught that looking inward was dangerous. But now, something is shifting. The mist is thinning, and the voice, the one you buried long ago, is beginning to rise again. Faint, but familiar, like something sacred returning home, not to erase the self, but to remember it. It wasn't a mistake. The forgetting, the illusion, the long spiral of darkness through which the soul wandered, aching for something it couldn't name. It was part of the design. You see, not all veils are curses. Some are agreements, sacred ones, made before time touched your name. There is a truth so luminous, so infinite, that to carry it constantly would overwhelm the senses. So you chose, or rather, your soul chose, to come into this world cloaked in forgetting. Because only through contrast could the truth be remembered fully. This is the cosmic agreement, that you would forget what you are, so you could remember it not as information, but as experience, as transformation, as embodiment. An illusion was the classroom. You needed to feel the weight of separation, to long for union. You needed to believe you were powerless, to remember your true force. You needed to place your faith in external saviors, so you would one day turn inward and find the flame still burning. Without illusion, there is no awakening. Without distortion, there is no clarity. Without forgetting, there is no homecoming. The Age of Pisces, with its myths, its control systems, its oceans of confusion, was not just a trap. It was a mirror, a training ground for souls who came here to feel deeply, to weep, to doubt, to suffer the silence between themselves and the divine, until the silence broke. And in that breaking, truth could emerge not as dogma, but as fire. It's easy to forget this when you're in the middle of it. When the illusion feels heavy, when the world around you tells you that you are small, accidental, or broken. But what if the illusion was never meant to harm you, only to prepare you? Because the soul cannot awaken to its own light until it has walked through the dark. This is the paradox of incarnation. You are born divine, but veiled, not to be punished, but to explore, not to be corrected, but to become. You agreed to this, not from fear, but from love, from a place beyond form. You saw the density of this world and said yes. Yes, I will forget. Yes, I will descend. Yes, I will walk blindfolded through illusion, so that one day, in the quiet of my own remembering, I will awaken. And when I do, that awakening will ripple backward through every lifetime, forward through every choice, and outward into the world that forgot it was dreaming. This is not a punishment, it is a return. And now, beloved soul, the veil is thinning, not just for you, but for the whole of humanity. And what was once illusion is becoming vision. The past is not behind you. It circles beneath you, above you, within you. Because time, real time, doesn't move in lines. It spirals. And every age is a mirror, reflecting not just where we are, but where we've been, and where we are about to return. The ancients knew this. They watched the skies not to predict daily fate, but to track the soul of the world, to listen to the breath of the cosmos. They weren't forecasting your personality based on sun signs. They were mapping epochs of consciousness. They knew the earth moves with a subtle wobble, a great celestial drift called the precession of the equinoxes. Roughly every 2,160 years, the spring equinox rises in a different zodiac sign. And with each shift, an age begins. 12 signs, 12 ages. A grand cycle spanning over 26,000 years. One great year, the Platonic year, spoken of in Egyptian temples and whispered in Vedic hymns. To them, this wasn't abstract. It was alive. Each age brought a new frequency, a new lesson, a new invitation for humanity to evolve or repeat. Lemuria fell, Atlantis dissolved, and still the wheel turned. Pisces emerged as the age of belief, of surrender, of illusion, of emotional depth, and of forgetting. It followed Aries, the age of war and conquest, fire and empire. And now, we stand at the edge of Aquarius, the age of awakening, electricity, revelation. But transitions are never clean. One age doesn't end with a date stamped on a calendar. It fades as the next begins to rise, like twilight bleeding into dawn. And during these thresholds, everything is amplified. The old ways tighten their grip. The illusions become louder. The fear gets sharper, not because the darkness is winning, but because the light is approaching. We are living in that threshold now, a moment between worlds, where the patterns of the old still echo, but no longer fit, where the new has not yet fully landed, but is already vibrating through the collective. The ancient astrologers knew this moment would come. They didn't name it 2020 or 2025. They felt it, and they left signs. In stone temples aligned with the stars, in myths of floods, fires, and renewals, in zodiac wheels carved into the walls of Dendera and hidden in Sumerian texts. Not to warn us, but to remind us that we've been here before, and that this is not the end. It's the spiral returning, a new octave of the same song. And if you quiet the noise, you'll feel it. The wheel turning, the veil thinning, and the mirror finally showing you what's always been beneath the surface. They didn't just inherit the Age of Pisces, they hijacked it. Because Pisces, at its highest, is the age of mysticism, compassion, spiritual union. But at its lowest, it's illusion, escapism, blind belief. And those in power knew exactly how to use it. They saw the emotional softness of Pisces, the desire to believe, the longing for something higher, something meaningful, something eternal. And they turned that longing into leverage. It began with Rome, not the Rome of myth or marble, but the Rome of conquest, steel, expansion, control. An empire that once persecuted mystics for challenging its authority. And then, once it saw the power of faith, adopted their symbols for its own. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, not to liberate it, but to weaponize it. And within decades, what was once a mystical rebellion became the new machinery of empire. Church and state merged, doctrine and law fused, and emotion became the tool. They didn't need to control people with armies anymore. They could do it with guilt, with shame, with sin. They made you feel broken by birth, flawed by nature, in need of redemption that only they could sell. And the church became the sole distributor of salvation. Confess here, pray this way, pay this tithe, obey this structure, fear this punishment, and above all, never look inward. Because if you found the divine within yourself, the entire system would collapse. They used the symbols of Pisces to their advantage. The fish, the water, the shepherd and the flock. They told you God was love, but also wrath, that heaven awaited, but only after suffering. That questioning was rebellion, but obedience was divine, and they played to the heart, not the mind. Because Pisces rules the emotional body, and when fear and faith are mixed together, they become difficult to untangle. So people submitted, not because they were weak, but because their desire to belong was stronger than their doubt. Entire generations lived and died inside this manipulation. Wars were fought in the name of peace. Books were burned in the name of truth. Witches were executed in the name of purity. And still, the age wore a mask of holiness, but beneath that mask, it was power. The kind that doesn't just tell you what to do, but tells you who you are. This is the shadow of Pisces, the weaponization of faith. But no age lasts forever. And as the age begins to shift, so does the spell, because the masses are remembering what empires try to erase. That divinity cannot be owned. Truth cannot be controlled. And the soul was never meant to be ruled. There is no deeper wound than to be told your light is darkness, to feel something ancient stirring within you, only to be told it's dangerous, to hear the quiet voice of knowing, only to be silenced by fear. This is the essence of the great inversion. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, intentional, calculated, a reshaping of symbols, a twisting of meaning, a reversal so profound that even the purest truths were flipped on their heads. Light was called evil, darkness was made holy, and the sacred was hidden beneath layers of shame. They told you the body was sinful, but the cross was sacred. They told you intuition was foolish, but blind obedience was wise. They told you the earth was fallen, but the institution was divine. Everything that once brought you closer to source, breath, touch, presence, nature, self-inquiry, was deemed a threat. Because those things don't require a middleman. They don't need temples or tithes. They don't follow hierarchy. They awaken something sovereign. And sovereignty was the greatest danger of all. So they inverted the map, demonized the feminine, vilified the mystic, erased the priestess, the healer, the sage. The snake, once a symbol of wisdom and renewal, became a symbol of evil. The tree, once the axis of the world, became a site of shame. The inner journey, once the path to awakening, became heresy. They didn't just distort ideas, they rewired the collective nervous system so that fear would fire every time truth tried to rise. Even now, you feel it. That subtle hesitation, that lingering voice that says, what if I'm wrong to question? What if this knowing in my bones is dangerous? But that voice isn't yours. It was planted. The great inversion wasn't just spiritual. It was psychological, energetic, global. It created a world where suffering became virtue, where silence became safety, and where forgetting became survival. But the inversion is cracking, because the soul can only be turned upside down for so long before it begins to flip itself back over. You begin to remember that light is not pride, that love is not weakness, that your knowing is not rebellion. And as you turn inward, not to escape, but to reclaim, the whole illusion begins to unravel. What they call dark was your light. What they call sin was your sovereignty. And what they called salvation was just another veil. But no veil can hold forever. And now, the truth is turning back to face itself, unshaken, unapologetic, and unmistakably yours. They tried to bury it, to silence it, to rewrite it in stone and law, but the soul cannot forget what it was carved from, even in sleep. It remembers, even beneath centuries of dogma, denial, and distortion, something inside the human spirit kept whispering, this isn't the whole story. There's something more. This isn't the end of the path. It's the forgetting of it. And so, a quiet rebellion began. Not in palaces, not in armies, but in caves, in gardens, in the margins. The mystics felt it first. They weren't interested in power. They weren't trying to overthrow empires. They simply wanted truth, not the truth printed in books, but the one written in stars and skin and stillness. Yeshua wandered into deserts. The Buddha sat beneath a fig tree. Lao Tzu walked away from the kingdom. Each of them heard the same call, a knowing that the divine wasn't waiting above, it was rising from within. And though they spoke in different tongues, different lands, and different metaphors, the current was the same, a rebellion of remembrance. The Sufis danced under moonlight, spinning their bodies into orbit with the unseen. The Gnostics kept the flame of hidden knowledge alive, even as the Church tried to extinguish them. The Taoists mapped the invisible forces of the universe, not with conquest, but with surrender. They were poets, healers, wanderers. They weren't always named in history books, but they lit the spaces in between. And even when the empire co-opted the teachings, distorted the messages, or burned the messengers, the soul's rebellion continued. In chants sung beneath breath, in dreams passed between generations, in herbal medicines carried in aprons, in lullabies that remembered what words could not. The rebellion was never loud. It didn't storm the gates. It opened doors from the inside, because it knew, deep down, that awakening cannot be forced. It can only be remembered. And every time a child looked at the stars and felt homesick, every time a woman stood under the moon and cried without knowing why, every time a man questioned the voice in his chest instead of the voice on the altar, the rebellion grew, not out of hatred, but out of longing, not to destroy, but to heal. Because what the system never understood was that truth doesn't need permission. And what the soul never forgot was that even in the deepest sleep, it dreams of the light. So when the Age of Pisces buried the sacred, the soul planted seeds, quietly, patiently, and now those seeds are rising, because the rebellion was never against the world. It was against forgetting. And the moment of remembrance is here. It didn't begin with a bang. There were no trumpets, no grand announcements from the sky. The dawn began in silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that speaks, the kind that hums beneath the noise, the kind that only the soul can hear. Before the age began to visibly shift, before structures started to collapse, before the matrix began to crack, something subtle stirred, a whisper, a ripple through the ether, a signal that it was time. And so certain souls answered, not out of obligation, but from love. They incarnated just before the breaking, not to avoid the storm, but to anchor the new light before it arrived. They were born into systems they didn't recognize, families that couldn't understand them, worlds that felt wrong, not because they were broken, but because they were carrying codes from another time. Old souls, starseeds, memory keepers, they often felt alone, out of place, as if they were mourning something they couldn't name, or remembering a song they hadn't yet heard. They questioned everything, the rules, the labels, the rituals, not out of rebellion, but because none of it resonated. They saw the cracks in the illusion, felt the lies beneath the surface, and even when they tried to fit in, something inside refused, because they weren't meant to sleep through the shift. They were here to feel it, to witness it, to become it. Their bodies carried the frequency of the coming age. Their presence destabilized the old energies, not through force, but through contrast. Some became artists, some became healers, some simply walked through life with a light too bright for words. They were misunderstood, misdiagnosed, labeled as too sensitive, too emotional, too strange. But the truth is, they were tuned to the future, tuned to the invisible. They came to remember early, so they could help others remember when the veil began to thin. They were the first to hear the silence beneath the chaos. Because the shift doesn't begin with revolution. It begins with recognition, with stillness, with the quiet moment when a soul says, "Something is changing. I don't know what it is, but I feel it." And that feeling becomes a fire, a compass, a calling. These early risers are everywhere. You might be one of them. And if you've spent your life feeling like you don't belong, perhaps it's because you didn't come here to belong. You came here to remember, so others could too. And now, as the world begins to shake, that silence is becoming a song. The dawn is no longer approaching. It's here, and you are the light, before the world even knows it's morning. There's a stirring you can't quite name, a quiet uprising not in the streets, but in the soul, a sense that reality itself is loosening, stretching, cracking at the seams. This isn't just a feeling, it's an age waking up. The Age of Aquarius has begun to rise, and it's unlike anything that came before it. Astrologically, Aquarius is the water bearer, but not of water itself. He carries the vessel, the container, the technology that holds the waters of truth. He doesn't drown you in emotion. He pours revelation. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, the planet of lightning, disruption, invention, and sudden change. It breaks what is stagnant. It electrifies what has decayed. It reveals what has been hidden. And when this archetype begins to move through the collective, nothing stays the same. That's why now feels different. Because it is. You're not just feeling personal shifts. You're standing inside a cosmic one. We are moving from the age of faith to the age of knowing, from the age of belief to the age of experience, from blind devotion to awakened sovereignty. And this shift is not gentle. Aquarius doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for systems to adapt. It shatters the old to make space for the new. And you can feel it in the collapse of institutions, in the rise of technology, in the hunger for truth that no longer fits inside religion or tradition. People are waking up, not because they're being taught, but because something ancient is activating. Truths once hidden in ancient scrolls and forbidden books are now appearing on screens. Concepts like energy, frequency, vibration, once dismissed as mysticism, are being confirmed by science. The veil is not just thinning, it's dissolving. Aquarius is the sign of the collective, but also of the rebel. It asks you to serve the whole, not by conforming, but by becoming yourself fully. That's what makes this age different. It doesn't need leaders to follow. It needs individuals who remember who they are. In Pisces, you are asked to bow. In Aquarius, you're asked to rise, to question, to explore, to reconnect to a truth that is not handed down, but awakened from within. This is why you're here. You didn't come for comfort. You came for the shift. You are not a witness. You are a bridge, a living vessel of the new code. And now, as the old cracks beneath your feet and the new floods through your chest, remember this: the water bearer has risen, and you are the one holding the cup. Electricity was never just energy. It was a signal that something ancient was returning. Aquarius is the ruler of all things electrical, lightning, frequency, circuitry, the invisible force that moves without wires. So it's no surprise that the rise of this new age has come hand in hand with a new form of consciousness. Digital. The internet wasn't just a human invention. It was a reflection of something much older, a mirror of the etheric web. The energetic network that mystics and seers spoke of long before servers and satellites. The web of life. The field that connects thought to thought, heart to heart, being to being. The ancients called it prana, chi, the Akashic field, a current of information flowing just beneath the surface of the visible world. And now, we've recreated it in metal and code. This is the double-edged sword of the Aquarian age. The digital realm is both a prophecy fulfilled and a trap laid carefully in its image. Because on one hand, we're more connected than ever. In seconds, we can access knowledge once hidden in temples. We can hear voices from across oceans. We can awaken through shared stories, revelations, and remembrance. This was the potential, the gift of Aquarius, the democratization of truth. But there's a shadow, because technology, like all sacred tools, reflects the consciousness of its wielder. And in the wrong hands, connection becomes surveillance, knowledge becomes noise, and freedom becomes addiction. You were promised access to everything, but somewhere along the way, you began to lose yourself. Attention fractured, nervous systems hijacked, scroll after scroll, chasing a feeling you couldn't quite name. The internet became a false akasha. Endless data, but no wisdom. Infinite voices, but no stillness. And that's the test. Can you use the tool without becoming the tool? Can you step into the web without being caught in it? Because the real etheric web, the one Aquarius was pointing to, isn't digital, it's energetic. It lives in the space between words, in the pull you feel when someone is thinking of you, in the synchronicities that algorithms can't fabricate. You've only begun to scratch the surface of what true connection means. And now, as artificial intelligence rises, as machines begin to mimic soul, the question becomes more urgent. Will you awaken through the digital age, or fall asleep inside of it? The technology was never the answer. It was the echo. You are the current, the frequency, the intelligence. And when you align with the real web, the one made of light, not wire, you don't just connect, you remember. You were taught to follow, to fit, to shrink your edges to match the mold. They called it culture, tradition, responsibility. But underneath it all, it was programming. You were taught that belonging meant blending, that to be accepted, you had to dissolve the parts of yourself that didn't match the herd. And so, you buried your knowing. You softened your voice. You forgot your shape. The Age of Pisces asked you to merge. And sometimes, merging became erasure. But the Age of Aquarius speaks a different language. It doesn't ask you to disappear. It demands that you remember who you are. Aquarius is the sign of the collective, yes, but not the crowd, not the mob, not the groupthink of conformity. It is the collective made of sovereign minds, unique, awake, radiantly distinct, and united only through resonance. Because unity is not sameness, it is harmony. And harmony cannot exist without individual notes. Each soul, its own frequency. Each life, a sacred design. This is the return of the individual, not the ego, not the narcissistic illusion of separation, but the true self, the one you came here to be before the world told you to become. You see, for too long, identity was shaped by the outer world, by roles, by approval, by fear of exile. You were the good child, the obedient believer, the acceptable version of 1,000 expectations. But the sovereign mind doesn't answer to expectation. It answers to truth. And that truth doesn't scream. It whispers. You feel it in the discomfort, in the moments when the crowd moves one way and your soul pulls you in another. You feel it in the urge to pause, to question, to leave the script. This is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. This is the soul remembering its shape. And in Aquarius, that remembering is not optional. It's inevitable, because the systems built on sameness are crumbling. And in their place, a new world requires new voices. Not louder, but clearer. Not echoing, but originating. The new earth cannot be built by those who mimic. It can only be built by those who create. So if you feel the urge to reclaim your voice, your vision, your strange and sacred truth, follow it. That is the path of Aquarius. Not isolation, but individuation. Not ego, but embodiment. Because only when you know who you are, can you find those who remember too. And together, not as a herd, but as a constellation of luminous souls, you become the collective this age has been waiting for. There was a time when you needed someone to speak to the divine for you. A priest, a prophet, a spiritual authority who stood between you and God. Not because the divine required it, but because the system did. For centuries, the sacred was fenced off. Only a select few were allowed in. Only the ordained could translate the mysteries. Only the pure could touch the holy. You were told you were too flawed, too human, too sinful to hear the voice of the infinite for yourself. And so you handed your power away. You let others decide what was true, what was worthy, what was divine. They built empires on this silence, wrote laws on your behalf, carved temples with locked doors, while the real temple sat untouched within you. But that age is ending. Aquarius does not recognize spiritual middlemen. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't seek hierarchy. It dissolves it, because this is the age of direct knowing. Not belief, but experience. Not memorized prayers, but felt presence. You no longer need a translator between you and the divine, because the divine is inside you, in your breath, your body, your intuition, your silence. Every cell in your being is a cathedral. Every heartbeat, a drum echoing through eternity. Every insight, a burning bush waiting to be heard. You are no longer a visitor to the sacred. You are the sacred. This doesn't mean the wisdom of teachers is lost. There will always be guides, mirrors, catalysts, but not authorities, not idols. The Aquarian current invites you to remember what the mystics never forgot, that the veil was an illusion. That separation was the dream. You were never meant to worship another man's revelation. You were meant to walk your own, not to repeat the teachings, but to live them. The ancient prophets weren't gatekeepers. They were reminders, not of their own divinity, but of yours. And now that remembering is rising. You feel it when you meditate and something opens. You feel it when a synchronicity speaks louder than a sermon. You feel it when your body tells you a truth your mind can't explain. That is presence. And presence is the new priesthood. No collar, no title, no robes, only awareness, only stillness, only the sacred whisper you carry in your chest. That says you already know, not because someone taught you, but because your soul remembers. This is the end of spiritual middlemen and the beginning of your direct line to the infinite. Time was never what they told you it was. Not a straight line, not a ticking clock, not a prison of hours. Time is elastic. It bends to consciousness. It opens when the soul is ready. And in 2020, something cracked. You felt it. Before you had words, before the world reacted, before headlines spun and systems strained, something deeper had already shifted. It wasn't just a global crisis, it was a portal, a moment when the illusion of linear time began to tear. What we called the future and the past started bleeding into the now. Memories resurfaced without warning. Dreams became messages. The days lost their shape. You couldn't tell what was ending and what was beginning. That's because they were happening at once. This is what the mystics have always known. That time is not a river flowing one way. It is a spiral, a breathing mandala, a sacred weave of events all pulsing around a single still point, presence. And when the spiral shifts, everything else does too. 2020 was not just a year, it was an initiation. The earth passed through an energetic threshold, and the collective timeline splintered. Some tried to hold on, tried to return to the way things were, but time was no longer there. You can't go back to what no longer exists, because the frequency has changed. This is what the ancient calendars pointed to, not the end of the world, but the end of the world as we knew it. The Mayan long count calendar, ending in 2012, wasn't wrong. It was misunderstood. The end wasn't an explosion. It was a recalibration, the beginning of a window. And that window opened fully in 2020, not for destruction, but for decision. Which timeline would you follow? Which version of reality would you inhabit? The one built on control, fear, and fragmentation, or the one pulsing with remembrance? This is the collapse of linear time, not as a punishment, but as a return to non-linear knowing, to intuitive living, to sacred timing, not based on clocks, but on resonance. You've already felt it. Moments stretch, conversations loop, days blur, and then suddenly, everything moves at once. This is not chaos, it's coherence in a new octave. And now, you're being invited to live from the center of the spiral, not chasing time, not fearing it, but becoming timeless. Because when time cracks open, what flows through is not just uncertainty, it's possibility, it's presence, it's prophecy fulfilled, not through events, but through you. You didn't arrive here by accident. This moment, this timeline, this exact incarnation was chosen, not by chance, not by fate, but by you. Before you were born, before your first breath cracked open the veil, you stood in the presence of your own knowing, and you said yes. Yes, I will enter the world when the old is collapsing. Yes, I will walk through the chaos. Yes, I will carry memory through the forgetting. You didn't come here to escape the shift. You came to embody it. This is the karmic contract of the now. Not karma as punishment, but karma as agreement. Sacred cause and effect, stretched across lifetimes. You came because you had done this before, because your soul recognized the pattern, because somewhere in your eternal memory, you remembered what it feels like when an age ends, and more importantly, when one begins. The world is not random. It moves in spirals of consciousness, and souls align with those spirals. You didn't come here to observe. You came to participate, to anchor, to remember, to radiate. And yes, it's difficult. The density, the distortion, the noise. There are days when you question if you can hold it, but the deeper truth is, you already are. Every time you choose love in the face of fear, you're fulfilling the contract. Every time you speak truth when silence would be safer, you're activating your code. Every time you fall apart and still get back up, you're rippling light through the collective field. Because this isn't just your story, it's ours. A tapestry of souls who agreed to meet here now at the edge of the old world, to dissolve what no longer serves, to transmute fear into frequency, to plant seeds in the ashes of the system. Your life may feel ordinary, but nothing about this timing is. Even your pain is part of the plan, because everything you've survived has made you a vessel for what's coming. You are not here to save the world. You are here to remember who you are, and in doing so, show the world it can remember too. Some souls chose to watch. You chose to become. You carry the codes of transition, the echoes of past lives rising in the present. And now, as the veil thins, as the illusion dissolves, as the spiral tightens, you'll feel it, the pull, the purpose, the promise you made before you arrived. And it will sound like a single, undeniable truth. I chose to be here, now, and I am ready. Before Pisces, before Rome, before temples, before time was fractured and bound in pages, there was something else. A memory buried so deep it feels like a dream. A whisper at the edge of your consciousness. A name carried through myth, and yet never fully erased. Atlantis, not a fantasy, not a children's tale, but a civilization of light, now drowned beneath waves of distortion. The ancients didn't speak in fiction, they spoke in code. And Plato, in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, wasn't creating a story. He was preserving a warning, a memory of a high civilization, technologically advanced, spiritually attuned, a place where the energetic and the physical worked as one. Atlanteans weren't gods, but they lived in alignment with cosmic law. They understood frequency, harnessed crystalline technology, worked with the Earth's natural energy grids. They honored the balance between spirit and matter. But something fractured. As the collective ego grew, wisdom turned into control. Power was no longer sacred, it was hoarded. The harmony between inner knowing and outer invention collapsed, and so Atlantis fell, not just into the ocean, but into forgetfulness. The survivors scattered, the memories fragmented, but the blueprint remained, encoded in the temples of Egypt, carried through the mythologies of Sumer, hidden in the geometrics of sacred sites across the planet. And now, as Aquarius rises, that echo is returning, because Aquarius holds the frequency of what Atlantis was meant to become. Not its fall, but its fulfilled potential. A civilization that merges spirit and science, technology and integrity, sovereignty and unity. That's why so many souls incarnated now feel a strange pull, a longing for something they can't describe. They call it home, but it's not a place, it's a vibration. The remembrance of a time when humanity lived in alignment with cosmic law, before the distortions, before the veils, before the great forgetting. Aquarius carries the codes of return, but not through imitation, through evolution. We are not here to rebuild Atlantis. We are here to learn from it, to remember what happens when consciousness expands faster than integrity, when technology outpaces wisdom, when the outer world advances while the inner world remains unhealed. This is the second chance, a spiral returning, but at a higher octave. And those who remember are not here to mourn the past. They're here to see the future, not as an echo, but as a new song, because what was lost was never truly gone. It was just waiting for you, for this moment, for the age that finally remembers. Your body is not what you've been told. It is not just muscle and blood, not just chemistry and bone. It is light, it is sound, it is frequency woven into form. And now, it is changing. The shift into the Aquarian age is not just a mental awakening. It is biological, spiritual, energetic. Because Aquarius is ruled by electricity, by charge, current, and sudden activation. And that charge is pulsing through you now. Science once labeled 95% of your DNA as junk, a mystery, an evolutionary leftover. But mystics have always known there is no junk in creation. That dormant DNA is not broken. It is waiting, waiting for the right frequency, the right light, the right age. And now, the codes are arriving. In dreams, in sound, in vibration, in sun flares and star alignments, in the silent transmission of consciousness through thought and presence. What you are feeling in your body, in your nervous system, in your bones, is not weakness. It is activation. The Aquarian mutation is subtle, but it is real. You may feel exhaustion without cause, random surges of energy, sensitivity to light, sound, emotion, a hunger for foods you once avoided, or a rejection of things you used to love. This is the rewiring. Your cells are shifting from carbon-based density to crystalline receptivity, from matter locked in form to form that holds more light. Crystals are not magic. They are structured precision. They store, transmit, and amplify frequency, and so will you. This isn't about becoming superhuman. It's about becoming fully human, as you were always designed to be. Your DNA is not just genetic memory. It is a library, a cosmic archive of lifetimes, timelines, and potential. And the light codes of this new age are beginning to unlock it. You are not just evolving forward. You are remembering backward, remembering the Lemurian softness, the Atlantean clarity, the ancient rhythms of harmony with earth, stars, and soul. This is bio-spiritual evolution, not forced, not engineered, but organic, energetic, inevitable. And you don't need to understand every mechanism. You just need to listen to your body, to your breath, to the subtle guidance that says, rest now, move now, breathe here. This food, that sound, this silence. You are not malfunctioning. You are upgrading. The blueprint is already within you. And now, the frequency has arrived to awaken it. This is not fantasy. It is the sacred science of consciousness made flesh. And your body, once underestimated, is becoming the vessel for a whole new kind of light. You were never just a body. You were a field, a dynamic, living, breathing system of energy, radiating, receiving, and reshaping reality in every moment. But you were taught to forget, to see the world as solid, to believe that change only comes through action, effort, and control. They never told you that energy responds to intention, that your thoughts are frequencies, that your emotions are magnets, that your being creates ripples in the field around you. But now, in the age of Aquarius, this truth is returning, not as theory, not as mystical poetry, but as sacred science. Aquarius rules the invisible forces, electricity, magnetism, frequency, and with its rise, the veil is lifting on a truth that has always lived just beneath the surface. Reality is not built from matter. It is built from energy, and energy responds to consciousness. This is what the ancient initiates knew. It's what was hidden in the temples of Egypt, encoded in Hermetic texts, whispered in the Vedas, passed through the silence of Eastern masters. As above, so below, as within, so without. Manifestation is not magic, it is alignment. It is not about getting what you want, It is about becoming what matches it. When your frequency matches the vision finds you. Not because you chased it, but because you became the field that could hold it. This is energy mastery, not manipulation, but coherence, not control, but clarity. When your thoughts are scattered, your field is scattered. When your emotions are charged, your field is magnetized. Everything you feel, say, and think is an instruction to the universe. And now, the Aquarian current is amplifying this feedback loop, which means the gap between thought and result is shrinking. Time delays are dissolving. The field is becoming more sensitive. You may have already noticed it. Instant karma, immediate reflections, things manifesting faster than ever, both light and shadow. This is not punishment. It is precision. The universe is showing you your vibration in real time, not to shame you, but to teach you how powerful you are. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a conductor of frequency. And Aquarius is here to remind you that the sacred sciences were never lost, just hidden, guarded, preserved for the moment when humanity would be ready to use them not for domination, but for elevation. That moment is now. The age of energy has returned, and with it, the rise of the energy master. Not someone who controls the world, but someone who masters the self. Because when you understand your field, you no longer need to force outcomes. You become the vibration, and the world begins to rearrange around you. Illusion doesn't dissolve quietly. It fights to survive, because the systems built on control know that their time is running out. You can feel it. The frequency of fear growing louder, the narrative tightening, the pressure building in every institution, every screen, every corner of the collapsing world. This isn't coincidence. It's the Matrix, fighting back. The Piscean systems, the ones built on hierarchy, guilt, blind faith, and emotional manipulation, were never designed to release you gently. They were built to hold you until the very end. And now, as the Aquarian age begins to rise, those systems are activating every defense they have. Distraction, division, doubt. Because when truth begins to return, illusion must amplify to maintain its grip. This is why things feel louder, faster, more chaotic. It's not because the world is ending. It's because the dream is unraveling. The Matrix knows how to replicate itself. It knows how to mimic awakening without allowing liberation. False prophets, spiritual influencers selling salvation in new packaging, artificial light, synthetic truth. It knows how to use your language while still feeding the same control. It will offer safety, but only if you silence your intuition. It will promise peace, but only if you follow the script. It will sell you awakening, but only if it fits inside its algorithm. But this is how illusion dies, not with silence, but with noise. And your job is not to fight it. Your job is to see it, to recognize the pattern, to feel the familiar grip of control, guilt, or manipulation, and choose presence instead, because the Matrix cannot survive in clarity. It feeds on fear. It feeds on reaction. It feeds on unconscious agreement. But when you step back, when you breathe, when you choose awareness over anxiety, it weakens. You are not here to war with the old world. You are here to outgrow it, to embody such coherence that the illusion dissolves in your presence. And yes, it may push harder as you rise. It may test your resolve. It may use your family, your screens, your doubts to pull you back into the loop. But you didn't come this far to return to sleep. You came to see through it, to walk the edge, to hold the light steady, even as the shadows scream. And you're not alone. There are others, holding the line, tuning to the truth, refusing to trade sovereignty for comfort. Because the matrix is loud, but your knowing is louder. And now, the illusion is beginning to tremble. Not because you fought it, but because you remembered what was real. There is a war happening, but not on the outside. It lives in the space between your thoughts and your heart, between what you've been taught to believe and what you already know. The battle of belief versus knowing is the final frontier of awakening. Belief is inherited, given to you in childhood, in culture, in ritual. It tells you how the world works, what's right and wrong, who you are, and who you're not allowed to be. It's memorized, recited, defended, but knowing rises from within. It doesn't argue, it doesn't shout, it doesn't need proof. It arrives like a whisper in the bones, a resonance that bypasses the intellect. It speaks in chills, in tears, in the stillness after the noise. For thousands of years, humanity was taught to abandon that knowing. You were told the heart is deceptive, that your own intuition was suspect, that truth lives in books, in temples, in pulpits, but never in your chest. And so you learned to doubt yourself, to silence the subtle voice, to trust the doctrine over the dream. This was not accidental, because direct experience cannot be controlled. Only belief can be systematized. Belief turns mystery into rules. Knowing turns rules back into mystery. And the old world was terrified of mystery. So they gave you answers, even when the questions were still forming in your soul. They told you who God is, what happens after death, what to fear, what to follow, who to forgive, and when. But what if the real answers come only when you stop asking from the head and start listening from the heart? Aquarius is the age of direct experience. No more middlemen, no more second-hand truth. This doesn't mean every feeling is fact, but it means your resonance is real. When something aligns, you feel it. When something violates your soul, you feel that too. You can't be gaslit by your own frequency, but you have to trust it. And that's the challenge, because belief is comfortable. Knowing is disruptive. Belief can be shared in a group. Knowing is often walked alone, at first, but knowing leads you home. It leads you out of borrowed answers and into living truth. Not someone else's version of awakening, but your own. So if you're feeling torn between the old story in your mind and the new current in your chest, you're not broken. You're at the threshold. The old belief is dying, and the knowing is ready to rise. The universe is speaking, not in sentences, but in symbols. Not through logic, but through alignment. And suddenly, the world around you begins to shimmer, with signs, with numbers, with moments too precise to be coincidence. This is synchronicity, and it is not random. It is the language of Aquarius, because as the old ways of communication begin to fall away, the scripts, the systems, the sterile instructions, a deeper, more intimate form of guidance emerges, a guidance tailored to you, not to your culture, not to your belief system, but to your soul. Synchronicity is not just a curious event. It is an echo dash, a confirmation that something unseen is orchestrating with you. Carl Jung first gave it a name. He called it meaningful coincidence, and a causal connecting principle, where the inner world and the outer world suddenly reflect each other with uncanny precision. You think of someone, and they call. You see a number repeating again and again until it feels like the air is trying to tell you something. You open a book and there's the exact line you needed. You say yes to a path, and doors you never imagined begin to open. This is not illusion. It is intelligence. It is the universe revealing itself not as a machine, but as a mirror. The Aquarian field is electric. It is fast. It is subtle. And it responds to frequency, which means your thoughts, your intentions, your energy. They shape the signals you receive. You are not being tested. You are being tuned. Each synchronicity is a ping from the field, a breadcrumb left by your higher self, a note passed from source saying, yes, you're aligned, keep going. But to receive it, you must slow down. You must be present. You must begin to notice the invisible thread that's always been weaving through your life. Because this language isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It invites. It invites you to shift from the mind to the moment, from the intellect to the intuition, from asking, what does this mean, to simply feeling the message beneath the form. Synchronicity is not a superstition. It is the breakdown of the illusion of separation. It is the realization that life is not happening to you. It is happening with you. And the more you listen, the more fluent you become. Because Aquarius doesn't speak in commands, it speaks in resonance. And now, the universe is not waiting for you to find the path. It's whispering gently that you are already on it. They called them madmen, or saints, or messengers from heaven. But what they really were visionaries. The prophets, across time, cultures, and continents, spoke not of the end, but of a beginning. They didn't always use the word Aquarius, but they saw the frequency. They spoke of a time when truth would no longer be hidden, when the veils would be torn, when the sacred would no longer belong to temples, but return to the people. They saw systems unraveling, not because evil had triumphed, but because illusion had expired. They saw a war, not of weapons, but of perception. A time when what was once considered heresy would become the seed of liberation. The Bible said there would be a new heaven and a new earth. Isaiah wrote of a time when the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. But he wasn't talking about physical blindness. He was speaking of consciousness. Jesus spoke of the water bearer directly. In the Gospel of Luke, he tells his disciples, "Follow the man carrying the pitcher of water." It was a message, not about a man, but about an age where knowledge flows freely, where the sacred is poured into the world, without hierarchy, without control. The Hopi spoke of the time of purification, when the earth would be cleansed and a new people would emerge. Those who walk in balance with spirit and matter. The Maya, in their long count calendar, ended one grand cycle around 2012. They didn't say the world would end. They said the veil would thin, and we would enter the age of remembering. So what did they all see? They saw now, this time, this transition, this unraveling. But over time, their visions were rewritten, twisted, wrapped in fear, turned into warnings instead of invitations, because fear sells. Control thrives on mystery made terrifying. But beneath all that distortion, the original message still pulses. You are not being punished. You are being awakened. The storm is not destruction. It is rebirth. The shaking is not wrath. It is the bones of the old world finally breaking. So something new can be born. They didn't see fire raining from the sky. They saw fire rising from within. They saw the return of inner sight, the collapse of separation, the beginning of direct communion. they saw you. And now, as the prophecy becomes presence, as the story unfolds from metaphor into memory, you are the fulfillment, not of religion, but of remembrance, and of the age they long to see, now lived through you. You were told to wait, to look to the sky, to prepare for a savior to descend, a man, a figure, a return in robes and fire. But the second coming was never about a person. It's a frequency, a field, a reactivation of what was buried long ago. The Christ wasn't just a name. It was a state of being, an embodied frequency of unconditional love, radical presence, divine intelligence made flesh. Yeshua didn't come to be worshipped. He came to remind you of what lives in you. His message wasn't follow me. It was what I do, you will do also. And greater. But somewhere along the spiral, that truth was buried, institutionalized, sanctified in gold and stained glass, but stripped of its invitation. He became an idol instead of a mirror, and so humanity forgot that the second coming would not walk in from the clouds, but awaken in the heart. This is the return of the Christos frequency, not bound to religion, not owned by any faith, but encoded in every soul, a current of divine presence that once lit the temples of Lemuria, that pulsed through the priestesses of Isis, that whispered through the Buddha beneath the fig tree. The frequency of the One, made manifest through the many. And now, as the Age of Aquarius rises, that current is returning, not through doctrine, but through direct experience, not through sacrifice, but through sovereignty. The second coming is not coming. It's emerging in you, in the silence between breaths, in the sudden tears that fall for no reason, in the soft but undeniable knowing that something holy is waking up inside you. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be pure. You just need to be present, because the Christos field doesn't require sainthood. It requires sincerity. It asks only one thing. Can you see the divine in yourself and then in everyone else? This is what ends the illusion. Not dogma, not punishment, but recognition. Not salvation from above, but ignition from within. So if you've been waiting, stop. There is nothing left to wait for. You are not the witness to the second coming. You are its vessel. And every time you choose love over fear, truth over comfort, presence over performance, you bring that frequency to earth. This is not a return, it's a remembrance. The sacred fire lit once, now burning again in the temple of your soul. The towers are trembling, not just the buildings, but the systems, the ones that taught you to obey, to wait, to fear, governments, banks, religions, medical empires, educational machines. For centuries, they held the illusion together. They told you what was true, what was safe, what was possible, and in return, they took your sovereignty, your time, your voice, your ability to feel and discern for yourself. But now, as the Aquarian age floods in, they cannot hold, not because of conspiracy, but because of frequency. These systems were built on scarcity, control, separation. They were never meant to evolve, only to maintain themselves. And now, they've reached their limit. Aquarius brings truth like lightning, fast, unforgiving, precise. And when that current moves through a structure built on fear, it breaks. You can see it happening. In the cracks spreading across economic models, in the collapse of faith in political theatre, in the quiet quitting from systems that no longer nourish the soul. This isn't dysfunction, it's disclosure. What was hidden is surfacing. What was corrupt is exposed. What was sacred is being reclaimed. You are not watching the world fall apart. You are watching the mask fall off. And yes, it can feel terrifying. When the ground beneath your feet begins to shift, when the institutions you relied on no longer offer stability, when the old answers stop working. But what if that's exactly the point? What if these systems were never meant to last? What if their collapse is not your punishment, but your permission? Permission to build something new, not from control, but from connection, not from greed, but from generosity, not from fear, but from clarity. The Age of Aquarius is not anti-structure. It is anti-false structure. It demands alignment, transparency, integrity. It invites decentralization of truth, of power, of creation. And that decentralization begins in you. Because the more you reclaim your inner authority, the less you need to be governed. The more you trust your own frequency, the less you rely on broken systems to tell you who you are. You are not here to fix the old world. You are here to outgrow it. And as the towers fall, as the screens flicker, as the noise of collapse rises, stay still, stay awake. Because in that stillness, you will hear something ancient returning. A different kind of order. One not built on control, but on consciousness. And from that field, the real world will begin to rise. Not from the top down, but from the soul up. You were taught that love means giving everything, that to love is to lose yourself, to serve, to surrender, to endure. Pisces made sacrifice the highest form of devotion. It wrapped suffering in gold, called it sacred, made you believe that to prove your love, you had to bleed. And for many, that version of love became normal. Silent endurance, self-erasure, pain romanticized as loyalty. But now, Aquarius is shifting the frequency, and with it, the meaning of love itself. Because true love does not require your suffering, it requires your truth. Love is not a transaction, not an obligation, not a prize to be earned through pleasing, performing, or persevering. It is a vibration, a field of coherence, a mirror that says, I see you, I honor you. I will not lose myself to hold you. This is uncomfortable at first, because it asks for presence, not performance. It asks you to love without saving, to give without losing your center, to stay rooted in self, while still opening to another. Piscean love wanted to merge. Aquarian love wants to align, and alignment requires honesty. It requires clear boundaries. It requires saying no when it's easier to say yes. It requires walking away when something violates your soul, even if you care. This is not cold. This is sacred maturity. Because in this new age, love is not measured by what you endure. It's measured by what you awaken in each other. If it dims your light, it's not love. If it asks you to shrink, it's not love. If it teaches you to abandon yourself in order to belong, it's not love. That was the old script, and you don't have to read from it anymore. Aquarian love is spacious. It honors the individual and the connection at once. It says, be yourself fully, and if we resonate, we'll walk together. Not out of need, but out of choice. This kind of love may look quieter, less dramatic, less chaotic, but is deeper, truer, because it flows from sovereignty, not survival. You are not here to complete anyone. You are not broken. You do not need to be rescued. And love is not something you earn by suffering. Love is your natural state, when fear is no longer in the way. So let this new love in, the one that doesn't demand your sacrifice, but invites your presence, the one that doesn't consume you, but reveals you. Because in the age of Aquarius, to love is not to lose yourself. It is to become yourself, fully, freely, and without apology. You were told that to be good, you had to suffer, that to be worthy, you had to give it all away, that holiness was found in hardship, that virtue meant self-denial, that love meant sacrifice. And so you learned to carry the weight, to hold the pain, to become the one who always stayed, always gave, always endured. You became the martyr, not because you were weak, but because you were conditioned to believe that your value was in your suffering. This is the wound of the Pisces age, the shadow of compassion turned inward, the light of devotion distorted by centuries of control. You saw it in the saints who starved themselves, in the saviors nailed to wood, in the stories of holy men and women who gave until there was nothing left. And somewhere in your soul, you absorbed the message that to be spiritual was to sacrifice yourself. But now, as Aquarius rises, that wound is being revealed and healed, because sovereignty is not selfish. It is sacred. You are not made to bleed for love. You are not designed to disappear for peace. You were never meant to abandon yourself in the name of service. True compassion does not require your martyrdom. It requires your wholeness. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot uplift the world while carrying the weight of everyone else's healing. And you don't have to, because in the age of sovereignty, your worth is not tied to your suffering. It is remembered in your stillness, in your boundaries, in your ability to say no without guilt, and yes without fear. This is the liberation Pisces prepared you for, the letting go of old contracts, the rewriting of ancient vows, the moment you choose to step out of the cycle of savior and sacrifice and simply stand as yourself, in your body, in your knowing, not to fix the world, not to carry the pain of others, but to radiate truth as you are, because your sovereignty is your service. When you are whole, you become a mirror, not a rescuer, but a reminder. You show others what is possible when the martyr lays down their cross and picks up their crown, not to rule, but to remember that you were never here to suffer. You were here to rise. And now, you don't need permission. You don't need approval. You only need to return to the center of your own soul and say, I am no longer a sacrifice. I am a sovereign. And I am whole. The soul has no religion. It was never Catholic, never Hindu, never Buddhist or Muslim or Jew. It was never Protestant, never Orthodox, never saved, never damned. The soul predates doctrine, outlives dogma, moves through temples, books, and prayers, but belongs to none of them, because the soul is light. It speaks in silence. It learns through lifetimes. It evolves not through belief, but through being. And yet, you were handed a label at birth, a faith, a name, a tribe. Before you could speak, they told you what God to worship, what truth to follow, what path to walk. They meant well. They believed what they had been taught. But what they passed on was not freedom. It was a container. And some containers hold truth. Others hold control. Religion was never the problem. It was the institutionalization of the sacred. The moment when mystery became law, when revelation became rule. What began as a portal became a prison. And for centuries, the soul learned to speak in whispers. But now, Aquarius is here, and with it, the key. Because Aquarius breaks systems. It decentralizes power. It dissolves the need for permission. It reminds you that truth is not handed down. It rises up from within, that the sacred is not found in uniformity, but in authenticity. You don't need a label to access the divine. You don't need a title to feel the light. You are the altar. You are the temple. You are the ritual, the offering, the flame. And that doesn't mean you must abandon your lineage. It means you're invited to outgrow the parts that no longer fit, to move beyond the name and into the essence. The world is still at war over whose God is right, still drawing lines in the sand, still killing in the name of love, but the soul remains untouched. It does not wave a flag. It does not take sides. It knows that all rivers, when followed far enough, lead back to the same sea. So now you are being called to remember that you are not here to conform to a creed. You are here to embody a current, not to recite the truth, but to become it. No label, no banner, no borrowed belief, only light, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real, the kind that doesn't ask to be worshipped, only lived. And that light is your soul, naked, unclaimed, finally free. You are not here by accident. You are not here by coincidence. You are not here just to survive this shift. You are here to embody it. There are souls who come to learn, and there are souls who come to remember. You are one who remembers, even if your mind forgets, even if you question, even if the path has been fogged with doubt, grief, or silence. The remembering has never stopped. It pulses beneath every breath. It moves in the stillness behind your thoughts. It speaks in the language of feeling, not logic. And what it says is simple. You came here now, not to escape this world, but to redream it. You carry codes in your body, truths in your bones, frequencies your ancestors couldn't speak aloud, but passed forward in song, in prayer, in firelight. You came in knowing that this time would be different, that the old would collapse, that the illusions would scream, that the shadows would rise one last time. And still, you said yes. You didn't come to wait for a new world. You came to build it, with your voice, with your art, with your presence. You are the bridge between the ages, the living link between what has been and what is being born. The Piscean era taught you how to surrender. The Aquarian era is teaching you how to stand, not with force, but with alignment. Not with fear, but with clarity. Not with borrowed scripts, but with your own sacred design. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need a stage or a platform or permission. You only need to be true, because your frequency is the mission. And every time you choose that truth, over comfort, over conformity, over old contracts, you ripple it out into the field. That is the work now, to walk as the remembering itself, to live in a way that says, this is what's possible, this is what's real, this is what remains after the illusion falls. You may not always feel ready, but the mission didn't require certainty, it required willingness, and you've already begun. So let the others sleep a little longer. Let the old stories echo if they must. You keep dreaming, but this time dream with your eyes open, not of the world as it is, but of the world your soul knows is waiting, because the mission was never to escape this place. It was to return to it as the light you were born to be. And now, beloved, you are that light. Let it shine, let it speak, let it build what comes next, and let it remind every soul it touches that remembering is contagious, and this dream is just beginning. Welcome home. Welcome to the Age of Awakening. If something in you stirred while listening, If a part of you remembered, then this message wasn't just content, it was a calling. So let it echo. Leave a comment below, not just to be heard, but to connect. You're not alone in this remembering, and your voice may awaken someone else. Share this video with someone you know is ready to see beyond the veil. Like it if it lit a spark in you. And most of all, subscribe. Not just to follow a channel, but to join a movement, a soul wave of seekers, truth carriers, and bridge builders between the worlds. This is just the beginning. The age of illusion is ending. The age of awakening has arrived. And we, the ones who remember, are finally rising. Welcome to the hidden voyage. Welcome home.